Hey, congratulations! You have made it to the end of your 7th grade year. And this is going to lead us up into 8th grade. So from here on out, you're 8th graders. But before we go into really the deep depths of American history and you begin to love it and desire it and just eat it up like I do, we actually have to talk about some 7th grade stuff. And that's the Enlightenment and how it impacts the American Revolution. So if you remember way back when at the beginning of this year, we talked about the Enlightenment and how it changed the way governments ran and how people all over the world suddenly started questioning their governments. And so it does that in America as well, just a little later. So today, in your notes, you need to label this Day 1, and it is the Enlightenment / Great Awakening. So during the Enlightenment, that's happened around between the 17th and 18th centuries, Europe experienced a scientific and political thought revolution that came to be known as the Enlightenment. People used reason and mathematics to understand the world around them. They were no longer happy with just saying, why is the sky blue? Well, because God made it that way. They wanted to understand why it was the way that it was. One of those philosophers that we're going to talk about in particular is John Locke. This guy right here that kind of looks like your weird old grandma. John Locke was a philosopher and he applied scientific reason to government ideas. So he, just like how Galileo and Copernicus and many of these other scientific revolutionary thinkers were, he starts to develop the same kind of thought process, but now for government instead of science only. And he comes up with the idea of natural rights, that you have 3 of them: life, liberty, and property. And those natural rights make up what what the government's role is to protect those natural rights in what he called the social contract. The social contract is this idea that you, the people, allow our leaders to be in charge, mainly because it is their job to protect those natural rights. And if they don't, you have the right to rise up and disband them or have a revolution to do so. That the government fails to protect those natural rights, they break that social contract, and therefore you have the right to stand up for yourself. He also, as a result of his social contract, the colonists, the American colonists at the time, they're going to pick up on this idea and they're going to love it, all right? They're going to use it as justification for the American Revolution. In particular, Thomas Jefferson, the gentleman who wrote the founding father who wrote the Declaration of Independence, is going to use a similar phrase. Instead of life, liberty, and property, he's going to say life, liberty, and happiness. He's going to say that because the British government, the king in particular, is not granting people that life, liberty, and happiness, therefore they should have the right to revolt and become their own country. We're also going to talk a little bit more about Baron de Montesquieu, who was also a philosopher, and he comes up with the idea of checks and balances. And this is the idea that the government should not just be top down, that it shouldn't just be one person in charge, i.e. the king. Instead, it should be separated out into equal parts, and the job of each of those parts of the government are going to be to watch over each other part and make sure that one doesn't become more powerful than the other, that they always stay nice and equal. We're going to use this theory and this ideology when we create our own government. We have 3 branches of government to this day, and the idea is that they are all equal and that they all watch out over each other. We're also going to look at the ideas of Adam Smith. If you remember, we talked about him a little bit at the beginning of the year, and the idea of laissez-faire, the idea that the government should stay out of the way. It should not get involved in economic affairs. That when they do, they just muddy it up. So to keep the economy going and keep people to have the freedom and the liberty that they deserve, the government should stay out of the way. If you remember, I told you, think of him like Mr. Monopoly. This is going to be very important. We are going to talk about laissez-faire for quite a while. We're going to talk about laissez-faire for almost 200 years, or well, no, really about 150 years, until about 1940 when we really start to get rid of the idea of laissez-faire. Now, you cannot have the American Revolution without the Enlightenment and the Great Awakening. And the Great Awakening is a series of revivals that happen in the American colonies. But after the Enlightenment, many American colonists, they turn away from the idea of the religion. They think that it's a waste of time, that it's a sham, that it's just a tool of the government to kind of control them and corrupt them. And so they turn away from it. And in an attempt to kind of reassert their religious influence, preachers all throughout the American colonies really start to try to appeal emotionally to the colonists to kind of bring them back into the religious fold. And through a series of revivals in the 1730s and 1740s, you get what is known as the Great Awakening. Now, one of the major people who we'll talk about is George Whitefield. He is kind of known as Mr. or the Great Awakener. He's only 27 years old. He's a young man. He's younger than even I am. And he creates a series of plays about the devil. And the idea is that he would scare young women and children, and he would get people to come to hear what he has to say, mainly because he was such a good and theatrical speaker. I mean, this is like going to the theater or the movies today. And he really becomes America's first celebrity. People come from far and wide to hear George Whitefield talk about the evils of the devil and how they can be corrupted very easily. You also get this guy, Jonathan Edwards. No, not the 2004 vice presidential nominee, John Edwards. We're talking about 1700s John Edwards, or as his speech became known as, the sinners in the hands of an angry God. The idea is he's a theologian, he's a very emotional speaker, and he believed that young people, that's you, lived too freely. You were able to talk back to your parents and do whatever you wanted, and you really weren't living a very virtuous life. And so he wants to fright, as he says, fright persons away from hell. His job is going to scare the bejesus out of you into becoming a more religious and more pious person. His sermons had vivid descriptions of the devil and torments, of you being dangled over pits of fire and being dragged in by demons. And he is going to scare people literally into coming to church more often. Now, there are two sets of results that happen because of the Great Awakening. One is the religious results. You get better ministers, you get better church, you get churches that end up splitting, you start to get more sects of Protestantism, you get more people going to church, which was a benefit for those those preachers, and you also get the rise of Baptist and Methodist churches, which are still around today. But even maybe more important are the social results. You get a democratization of religion, which means it kind of starts to take power away from the churches and the minister and puts it more in the hands of people. They get more of a say about what their churches are like and what they want to hear. You also have a renewed interest in intellectualism, which means people start to kind of question more about the world around them and start to want to be smarter and start to want to go to college. And that actually starts to create the university systems and library systems that we see today. Many of America's first colleges and universities start out as seminary schools, as religious schools for people to go and learn how to become a priest or a preacher or to become a theologian. Harvard itself was started as a religious university. One of the biggest things, though, the biggest result is this. The American Revolution might not have happened without the Great Awakening. It paves the way for the eventual separation of church and state, and it gives people more of an outlet to be able to speak their mind. When you take the Enlightenment ideas and the Great Awakening and you merge them together, you start to see the creation of colonial American thought, that people now suddenly are going to think differently about the world around them, about their government choices, and about their forms of religion. And you'll see as we develop the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence and even the Articles of Confederation, all of this thought starting to come together. It helps to lead into the American Revolution and into our government we have today. So that is the first video. You have made it. You've done your first one. You'll have plenty of more to go. We will end up finishing this year with the civil rights movement. But this is video number 1. Give yourself a well-deserved pat on the back. Make sure you have this information in your notes. If you have any questions, also add those to your notes, as we will talk about them much more in depth tomorrow in class. Until then, have a great rest of your day, and I will see you all next time. Bye, everybody.